If you told me at any point prior to this year that PlayStation would ever be able to make a platformer that rivals the charm, joy, and unfiltered fun that most Nintendo games provided, I would have laughed at you. Astro's Playroom, the pre-installed game that comes with the PS5, showed a lot of promise, but was more of a proof of concept than a full game offering. Combine a first-party platformer drought with PlayStation's obsession with creating cinematic experiences, and I didn't think Sony would be able to come close to replicating my childhood spent in front of a TV playing Super Mario Galaxy for hours on end. To be fair, Nintendo hasn't even done this recently, with the last fully original 3D Mario game releasing over 7 years ago. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Sony releases Astro Bot. I think Astro Bot is one of the best PlayStation Studios games ever, and maybe even the best since 2018. It is a complete joy, and I would highly recommend it to any person that wants to pick up a controller. I had more fun with this game than almost any other this year. Pending my completion of Metaphor ReFantasio, it is my game of the year, and honestly, when I eventually finish Metaphor, and even if I love it, it may just be a toss-up between the two. Astro Bot is just that good. If you're cynical, like I am, you may think that there is no way that it could ever live up to all the praise that it is currently getting online. But I assure you, it is well worth the hype. So much so that it is now my go-to recommendation for new PS5 owners. But for all the glowing praise I could possibly give it, there is one thing that I wish that Astro Bot did slightly differently, and I wish that the game, for all of its triumphs, would have accomplished. It's actually one of the main reasons why I am making this video, because I have heard nothing but praise for this game. If you decided to watch a random review on Astro Bot, I highly doubt that you would find a single substantial fault discussed, and yet there was something missing when I finished. So much so that I was kind of surprised that not any other review I saw mentioned it. The other main reason I am making this video is because the game's strengths deserve to be celebrated. I want to dive into how it created this feeling of nostalgia. It was like reliving my childhood despite not even owning a PlayStation at that time. Plus, just diving into its one singular weakness wouldn't genuinely reflect my experience with this game, which was overwhelmingly positive, with one small caveat. Major spoilers for Astro Bot are in this video. It is a game best experienced blind, but if you already played it or just don't care, let's blast off and warp straight into discussing Astro Bot's astounding strengths and its only weakness. Let's begin by talking about the most prominent strength that Astro Bot has, its celebration of everything that PlayStation has accomplished for the past 30 years. Perhaps its biggest appeal to a majority of people lies in this premise. You go around collecting hundreds of little Astro Bot figures, and a good portion of them are styled after characters that have appeared on a PlayStation platform. They range from first-party icons like Kratos and Aloy, and extend all the way to third-party franchises like Resident Evil and Street Fighter. There are even some more obscure franchises referenced like Siren. I think that there are a good number of people that are going to latch onto this game not because of the incredible platforming, but because they can find somewhere, somehow, their favorite characters forever enshrined in bot status. If I wasn't familiar with Astro's Playroom and how good that short game was, this might have been the sole reason why I picked it up. And it's a good reason too. It is one of the biggest highlights of this game. When you are saving these Astrobots in the levels, it transforms random collectibles to wondering what character you will collect next. This means that collectibles are no longer there for collecting's sake. In every game with successful collectibles, they always add something of value that is there besides the quick dopamine rush you get by watching a number go up or a checkbox marked. Whether it's a story beat or a look at a fun universe within a universe, I should never get bored of finding them. Astro Bot is a step above these successful collectibles, which honestly I didn't think was possible. It makes me never want to go back to collecting anything else that doesn't provide the same amount of fun that these little bots have. It's funny because Astro Bot itself is the perfect showcase for a distinction between these amazing little buddies and the normal everyday shiny checkboxes. The game has its own version of a collectible that is more in line with something that you would find in a traditional platformer. Puzzle pieces are useful and unlock plenty of extra bonuses, but I never found as much excitement in comparison with collecting the bots. Yeah, the puzzle pieces allowed me to unlock customization options, but collecting them had no immediate reward. If I missed a puzzle piece, I could always come back later, but if I missed an Astro Bot, I missed out on finding who, from gaming history, I could add to my collection. I was going back for it, no questions asked, through hell or high water. Puzzle pieces aren't even that bad, as you're fairly well rewarded for collecting them. It's just that the bots are that good. It shows the power of developers getting creative selective with what you collect. If there's one thing that I hope Mario games can take away from Astro Bot, it's to have at least some collectibles extend past just purple coins or a moon. Something that I can look forward to grabbing by itself with no additional context required. While everything in this game is like taking a journey to rescue and restore 30 years of PlayStation, that journey is special because it involves you. If you have been a part of PlayStation at any point, saving these heroes and villains strikes a bit of an emotional chord that I didn't think there would be, especially because I joined the PlayStation family at the end of the PS3 era, which for a history of 30 years is a little bit late. In other words, I was adopted, but still loved as one of the family's own. So much so that when the game culminates to a moment in the final battle where you unleash a PlayStation armada, it felt earned. Each console is a ship, and each era assists you in rescuing the stolen CPU. Maybe this makes me a corporate sucker, but this made me emotional. It is like you and PlayStation are together, fighting to protect what you and PlayStation have built over the last 30 years. The game is also very adamant at acknowledging you, the player's existence. If you face the camera, Astro will wave at you. If you remain idle while on the dual speeder, Astro will motion you, almost as if he's saying, come on, let's go to the next level. Finally, at the very end, the game displays you as part of the credits. It's a subtle touch that makes a world of difference, because ultimately, Astro Bot doesn't display PlayStation history to shove it down your throat and promote its games, which makes the references and the celebration that this game is feel worthwhile instead of cheap. Invoking PlayStation nostalgia is not all Astro Bot is good at though. The platforming is amazing. Everything that is needed for a platformer to be successful is here. Tight and responsive controls, fun power-ups, and great level design. It's very obvious that Astro Bot is confident in the relationship between these power-ups and the world around it. Floating, stopping time, boosting, and rolling around feels seamless in a world where almost anything goes. But that anything is always tailor-made for the power-up you have in that level, which makes using that power-up a blast. Some Mario games have a bit of a different flavor than this. You can bring a squirrel suit into a level where it doesn't really belong and completely break it. It's fun to soar over everything, but you're not really interacting with the level like the developers intended. Astro Bot is the opposite of this. It forces you to interact with all of its levels in an intentional way. One of my favorite examples of this is a level where you get a penguin power-up that's absolutely useless above water, but as soon as the game gives you access to the underground playground, you're playing the game the way it was meant to be played, with new challenges and fun enemies to fight. There's no floating or soaring through content because you decided to keep the balloon power-up through the next few levels. It felt like every planet in this game could have been stretched out to a whole world. I think a lesser platformer would use and abuse the ideas here to create a longer but less satisfying game. But Astro Bot doesn't do that. It switches it up, constantly, rotating ideas, power-ups, and even level designs. There are 10 different power-ups spread across all different types of levels, and levels aren't just different visually, they're different in a design sense. There are linear levels, more open zones with bots to find all over, boss fights, and challenge levels that are a bit tougher than the status quo. There are even some battle arenas where you can fight enemies for a bot. Combine this with very little planets being alike, and you'll have plenty of one-and-done ideas where things you liked may never show up again. I mean, there's an enemy in this game that's only in one level, and then it's just never used again. This kind of restraint I find very controversial. While I definitely enjoy the constant variety, I think some people might find its idea swapping unfulfilling. But this didn't bother me for most of the game's runtime. As to why, I'll put it very carefully to avoid contradicting myself later in this video. For the level of difficulty and depth Astro Bot operates at during most of its runtime, I found the game's ideas and power-ups were used enough to be satisfying. This won't be enough for some people, and if you go in expecting a game to constantly test you, your expectations will not be met. A lot more on this idea later, but this experience is closer to a roller coaster than anything else. It's not meant to hone specific skills in relation to its content, for better or for worse. Finally, visually and technically, this game blew me away. This game's visuals have struck the perfect balance. They are enough to be a delight for the senses, but not enough to overload them. There's a lot going on, but it always felt like it was believably unreal. This sounds like nonsense, and it kind of is, but the story these backgrounds and planets tell are nothing but pure fun. You'll have monkeys and mice and giant robots that make Warner Brothers want to take legal action, and casinos and graveyards. It feels like every level is a dream. And what I listed is just scratching the surface of the pure range of this game. These visual treats are combined with a DualSense controller actually being used in a good way. Shocking, I know, and it all creates a game that has some of the highest amount of visual and sensory appeal that I've ever played. If I had to sum up this game's strengths in one sentence, it's this. Super Mario Galaxy, one of the best 3 platformers of all time, walked so that Astro Bot could run. That is maybe the highest praise that I could possibly give it, and it 100% earns it in every single aspect. Well, except for one. Astro Bot is a game of many different talents. There are a large variety of power-ups and items to use, ranging from a rocket strapped on your back to essentially stopping time. As I said before, this variety is a great strength, and yet I cannot say that I felt satisfied with Astro Bot's application of these ideas at the highest levels of gameplay. In other words, Astro Bot's biggest problem is that it doesn't merge its challenge with its creativity. There is both a challenging quality to this game and a creative one, and if they merged, it would have elevated this game even higher. None of the most fun abilities in this game are ever pushed to the limit. Throughout the base game, there are bonus planets themed around PlayStation shapes, and these are extra challenging levels. You have one life in a long series of platforming obstacles that test your ability to maneuver Astro expertly. It created a situation where I tried clearing the planet over and over again and wasn't going to leave until I won. And I loved the feeling it gave me when I finally snatched the bot at the very end of the level and completed the challenge. It's similar to beating a boss you spent hours on, but as of the Christmas updates, every single challenge level in the game has absolutely nothing to do with any of the unique and amazing power-ups that the game has. There was so much potential for challenge in this way that when I finished the game, it made me feel like I was missing something. There had to be another planet, a set of challenges. This couldn't be it, but it was, which is a big shame and a huge missed opportunity. I feel a bit crazy because I haven't seen this complaint mentioned anywhere else, and it might be because I'm unreasonably hard to please, or maybe everyone just doesn't care. But I think a more reasonable explanation is that Astro Bot is just that good at swapping out and providing creative content that nobody noticed it was missing any sort of mastery for its power-ups. Earlier, I said a few things I want to recontextualize. Specifically, the part where I say that for most of its runtime, Astro Bot's power-ups had just enough depth for what it tried to accomplish. The key idea in this sentence being for most of its runtime, because if there is ever a time to get creative and test your abilities, it would be in either a secret world or a final level. And guess what? Astro Bot has both of these things, and yet it fails to produce any sort of creative challenge in either. First, let's look at a good example of secret levels in another game. To do that, we have to head to the series that first inspired Astro Bot, Mario. For the most part, Mario games do secret levels and challenges really well. The secret world, or worlds, come after beating the main story. There are a collection of levels full of extra challenges. The odd thing about them is that they aren't necessarily full of entirely new levels with new concepts. Sometimes they are, but they're also old ones remixed with the difficulty cranked way up. Or maybe they take old ideas and make them new. At first, this remixing felt cheap, kind of like reused content, but after Astro Bot, I like the idea of bringing back old levels more than only providing new ones. Because when you have a game as varied as Mario or Astro Bot, showing an idea, then moving on really fast, then coming back to it is a great way to keep your game varied. But I always hope that those ideas are either completely revisited, or the challenge that they potentially represent was completely exhausted. That is why these Mario bonus worlds work so well. They take the best ideas that the game has, throws another level at you, and cranks up the challenge. By the end, you feel like you have mastered every possible thing the game can touch, and that feeling is what makes a set of final challenges work. Astro Bot doesn't do secret content well. The secret world is basically just more levels that you've never seen before. This wouldn't be too bad, but you can swap any secret level with any planet in the final two worlds and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's almost like your reward for finding these levels is more levels, and not mastery. It's more of the same varied content, and that's a little disappointing. However, that principle did not apply to the very final challenge level. This was fairly hard, and the game did push the limits of what Astro can do. While I personally wish that it was slightly more difficult, that's not the big issue here. The big issue is that the final level is only about what Astro, in his most basic form, can do, which absolutely should be challenged, but it feels incomplete. Half this game is using these weird quirky abilities and how they interact with the environment. It would have been so much fun to actually have super difficult levels featuring all these power-ups. Where's the balloon challenge where I have to time my rises and falls near perfectly? The rocket challenges where I have to boost at perfect times? The ball challenges where I have to switch between Astro and ball form at just the right moments? The penguin challenges that would perfectly test my underwater abilities? What about perfect time stops? Perfect monkey swings? If you wanted to get super crazy, why not combine abilities? You have two triggers. Imagine if you had to correctly switch between two different abilities. There's so much room for mastery that I can go on and on, as almost every single power-up has some potential to have a really fun final challenge, or even an additional level, and yet none of it is explored. This is where one of the game's strengths turns on itself. As I said before, Astro Bot is very intentional with its content. When that intentionality leads you away from content you would rather have, I found it to be creating a hole that none of the other worlds or challenges could fill. And that's a big shame, and I think if every other aspect of the game wasn't the home run that it currently is, this could have been a much bigger deal. Instead of a moderate blight in a sea of overwhelming positives, it could have been something that left a sour and disappointing taste in my mouth.
And the game of the year is Oh, das
Astro Bot!
Astro Bot just won the Game Awards Game of the Year award, and it was well deserved. Kudos to PlayStation and Team Asobi for creating something that is imaginative and evocative, especially pertaining to the emotions of my childhood that I thought were lost to time. It is a game that I can't speak highly enough about. If Team Asobi continues on this current trend of only getting better at their craft, I am convinced the next game they will make will surprise me in ways I never would have imagined. Kind of like how Astro Bot did, but the standard for quality raised even higher. It just sucks that the post-game content of Astro Bot wasn't that great. It really could have used a few more difficult levels that creatively incorporated everything that you have already done, just cranked up to 11. It's ironic that the final bot is Chop Chop Master Onion, because there is so little that the game forces you to master. It's almost like Master Onion is mocking you instead of celebrating your accomplishments. But this game is still getting updates, and there seems to oddly be a ton of space on the left side of the map. I hope that at some point this is filled with levels that really push the player to continue to master the creative power-ups that the game gives you. If this happens, I could say with confidence that Astro Bot is one of the best platformers I've ever played. Astro Bot is the journey of a lifetime, literally, because it looked constantly to PlayStation's past. But what if we moved beyond that? What does Astro Bot say about the future? I think it's easy to say that the game doesn't focus on this. I disagree. To me, it almost felt like collecting everything from PlayStation's history and rebuilding a PS5 allowed us to take our memories that we were so fond of and move forward with them. Every time Astro blasted off into the sky after conquering a planet, I asked myself, where would we be going next? The answer was often one that I didn't expect, but it was always full of fun. I think the next 30 years of PlayStation have the potential to be similar to the game that so fondly celebrated it. And while I don't know what the future of PlayStation holds, after finishing this game, there is now something that I know without a doubt. Wherever Astro goes, I will follow, and I couldn't be gladder that our PlayStation journey together is just getting started.